Have you ever woken up in the dead of night and had the unsettling feeling you were not alone? Dark encounters begin quietly.
Only in the reflection. A rural ER Rake encounter. The night shift always starts the same. The fluorescent hum, the stale coffee, the monitor cycling numbers that mean something if you stare long enough. I'm 36. I've been an ER nurse for 11 years, and the last 2 have scraped me down to whatever's left. My divorce finalized in January. The house is too quiet. I don't sleep unless I take something, and I hate how easily I say yes when the staffing text goes out. Tonight it was, need one more RN 7P to 7A, rural ER, light census. Light census means you'll have time to think. Time is the enemy. At 1:17 a.m., while I was charting at the nurse's station, the cardiac monitor in Trauma 1 went black for a second. Not off, just a dark screen between refreshes. I glanced up because you always glance up. In that black, a face stared back from the glass. Not my face. It was pale and too long, like the skin had been pulled over angles it wasn't meant to fit. The eyes were wide and wet bright, locked on me with the kind of attention that makes your throat tighten. It wasn't on the screen as an image. It was in the reflection, behind my shoulder. The monitor flickered back to vitals. Green numbers. A steady flat line because the room was empty. I turned around hard enough to pop my lower back. Trauma 1 was empty. Beds made, stainless trays nested and clean. The crash cart parked where it always is. The only movement was the slow swing of the automatic door closer settling. I told myself I'd caught my own reflection at a bad angle. A trick of darkness and fatigue. I went back to charting with my shoulders up around my ears. 2 minutes later, I did what you do when you're alone in a building at night. I checked again. Not by turning around, by watching the dark. The main workroom has a glass medication cabinet with a locking bar. It sits behind the nurse's station, angled just right so you can see the hall, the waiting room, and part of the ambulance bay doors if you stand at the Pyxis. I stepped in, tapped my badge, and stared at my own face in the cabinet glass while the drawer system booted. The pale face was there too, closer this time. Not behind me across the hall, right behind my shoulder, almost overlapping my cheek in the reflection. It looked like it had no nose until you noticed the shallow dips where it should be. Its mouth was thin and parted, not smiling. The eyes didn't blink. I spun, hands still on the Pyxis screen. Nothing. Empty hallway. The patient rooms on the left were dark. The nurse's station was a small island of light with chairs and clipboards and a half-eaten sleeve of crackers someone had left on a counter. No feet. No shadow. No sound. The Pyxis beeped because it timed out. The cabinet glass showed only me now, wide-eyed and too pale myself. I backed out of the workroom and went to the charge desk. We didn't have security overnight. Our security was a middle-aged EMT who could bench press a stretcher and a night supervisor who went home at midnight. The waiting room was empty except for a man asleep under the TV with his boots still on. The TV was muted. A storm warning crawled across the bottom like an apology. I pulled up the camera feeds on the small monitor under the charge desk. 4 views: ambulance bay, waiting room, main hall, and the nurse's station. Grainy. Too bright. The kind of feed you only notice when something is wrong. I stared at the ambulance bay view first. The double doors were closed. Rain traced lines down the glass outside. Then I saw it on the nurse's station feed. Not in the room. In the shine of the metal med cart parked beside my chair. A pale figure stood in that cart's reflection. Tall, narrow, hunched like it had learned posture from watching people who hurt. Its head was tilted slightly, the way someone tilts their head when they're trying to hear you better through a wall. Its eyes were aimed straight at the camera, straight at me. I looked up from the monitor to the actual med cart 8 feet away. Nothing stood behind it. Nothing stood beside it. The cart's surface was dull under the overhead lights, the kind of dull that makes you forget it can reflect at all. I looked back down at the camera feed. The pale figure was closer to the cart in the reflection, like it had leaned in. The eyes were bigger now, as if the distance had collapsed. My breath went thin. My fingers went numb. I touched the keyboard without feeling it. "Hey!" I called, trying to keep my voice normal. "James?" James was the overnight ER tech. 21, fresh out of EMT school, still optimistic enough to say, "Quiet night," out loud. He was restocking the supply closet at the end of the hall. "Yeah?" His voice came back, muffled through the corridor. "Need me?" "Come up front," I said. I didn't tell him why. You don't tell someone why until you've checked the simplest explanation. Until you've made sure you aren't losing your mind. I closed the camera feed window and stared at the black bezel of the monitor instead. A cheap trick. A dark surface. In that black, the pale face was there again, right behind me. Not a full body this time, just the head and shoulders. Its skin looked like wet paper. Its eyes were so close, I could see the shine in them, the little crescent reflections of the screen. I didn't turn around. I couldn't. Turning around had become the move that made me feel stupid, like I was participating in a game I didn't understand. Instead, I slid my chair forward until the monitor reflection changed angle. The face stayed. It kept eye contact even as my own reflection shifted. The hallway behind the nurse's station was empty in my peripheral vision. The light was steady. No footsteps. No breath. James appeared at the far end of the hall, carrying a box of IV start kits. "Hey, what's up?" he asked, stepping into the nurse's station. I couldn't look at the monitor bezel anymore. I forced my eyes onto James's face. Normal. Young. Tired. "Do you see anyone back there?" I asked, nodding toward Trauma 1, trying to keep my tone casual. He glanced. "No." "Any patients check in?" "No, just boot guy in the waiting room. EMS radio's quiet." I swallowed. My mouth tasted like copper. "Pull up cameras." James slid into the chair beside me, hands fast on the mouse. He had that easy confidence people have when they think the world is stable. The feeds popped up again. Ambulance bay, waiting room, hall, nurse's station. James leaned forward. "What am I looking for?" I stared at the nurse's station feed. The med cart shine was visible. My chair, the back of my head, James's shoulder. In the cart's reflection, the pale figure stood behind us. James sucked in air like he'd bitten his tongue. He didn't speak. He just stared. His pupils grew until his eyes looked almost black. "You see it," I said. He nodded once, too stiff. "Yeah." The figure in the reflection shifted closer. Not by walking. More like the distance between it and us had been edited out. Its face was higher now, as if it had straightened. I kept my eyes on the screen. "Don't turn around." James's voice came out tight. "Is it in the room?" I stared at the actual room through the corner of my eye. The air was normal. The cart sat silent. The chairs were empty. "No," I said, because the truth was worse. It isn't anywhere unless we look at it. James's breathing sped up. I heard it next to me. Human, panicked, real. The nurse's station feed flickered, the way cheap cameras do when the lights hum wrong. For a half second, the screen went dark. In that darkness, the pale face filled the whole space, like it had pressed itself against the camera lens. Then the feed returned. Normal distance. The figure still behind us in the cart reflection, head tilted now the other way. James backed his chair away with a squeal of wheels. His gaze went to the stainless steel tray on the counter, the one we set blood tubes on. I grabbed his wrist. Don't. He froze. Too late. His eyes had already dipped to the tray's surface. In the tray's shine, the pale face was there too, closer than any reflection had shown before. So close it looked like it was right behind James's ear, watching him watch it. James made a sound like a cough that went wrong. I pulled him toward the hall. Not running. Running is loud. Running says you know where the danger is. We walked fast, straight past the nurse's station, straight into Trauma 2 with the lights on. Trauma 2 has fewer reflective surfaces. Matte walls, curtains, a plastic supply cart. The only metal is the bed rail and the sink. I shut the door. It clicked like it always does. Not a lock, just a latch. James stood with his back to the wall, hands up like he was surrendering to the air. What is that? I don't know, I said. My voice sounded like it belonged to someone older, and I don't want to know. The sink in Trauma 2 has a steel faucet. The bed rail is brushed metal. Both can catch a face if the angle is right. I turned my eyes away from anything that could shine. James did too. We stared at the floor. The linoleum had scuffs shaped like map lines. Someone had dropped a suture pack here months ago and never picked up the thread. Silence pressed on us. Then, softly, the overhead light above the bed flickered. Not enough to go out, just enough to change the way the world reflected. The bed rail caught a thin line of glare. I didn't look. I could feel my eyes wanting to, like a reflex to confirm you're alone, like checking a rear view mirror. James whispered, "I'm not looking." "Good," I said. My phone buzzed in my pocket. A notification. A meaningless vibration.
The sound felt dangerous, like movement. I held still until the buzz stopped. We stayed in Trauma 2 until the first hint of gray crept into the high windows of the hall. Dawn didn't make me feel safe. It just made me feel watched under better lighting. At 6:58, the day shift charge nurse arrived, laughing at something on her phone. She stopped when she saw us sitting on the floor, backs to the wall, like we'd been waiting out a tornado. "What happened?" she asked. I didn't have words that made sense, so I said, "Check the cameras." We went back to the nurse's station together. The daylight made the place look smaller, more like a set. She pulled the footage from 1:17 to 2:05. The feeds played. Hallway empty. Nurse's station empty except for me and James. The med cart shine. No pale figure. No face. No eyes. Just a single glitch at 1:19. The nurse's station feed dropped one frame. A clean gap. A hiccup. In that missing slice of time, the reflection on the med cart was wrong. Like the cart had no shine at all. Like the laws of light had been briefly removed. The day shift nurse rewound and played it again.
"Probably the camera," she said, already bored. James and I didn't argue, because arguing would mean describing what we'd seen, and describing it would mean looking for it again. On my way out, I passed the glass medication cabinet. In daylight, it reflected me clearly. Tired eyes, hair pulled back, badge crooked. For one breath, in the cabinet glass, I saw someone standing behind me. Not a face this time, just a shape where no shape should be. I didn't turn around. I walked out through the ambulance bay doors into the wet North Carolina morning, keeping my eyes on the ground, because the only way I knew to stay alone was to stop checking if I was. The Watcher of Wilmington Marsh. We moved to Wilmington in late summer because it was cheaper than Raleigh, and my job let me work remote. We found a little rental tucked behind a line of live oaks where the neighborhood thinned into marsh. The realtor called it coastal quiet. The first night, the frogs and cicadas sounded like machinery warming up. Our daughter, Junie, was 9 months old and still small for her age. She had a long list of "keep an eye on this" notes from the pediatrician. She tired fast. She ate like every swallow was a negotiation. She slept in thin, shallow patches, and when she woke, she cried with a hoarse, startled sound that made my chest lock up. My wife, Erin, was in that fog people politely call postpartum depression. She didn't say the words. She didn't have to. Her face looked like it was trying to remember itself. Some mornings, she stood in the kitchen holding a bottle and staring into the sink, and I would step in and take it from her like we were doing a quiet relay race. I started staying up late, then later. I told myself it was for work, for bills, for fixing the loose cabinet hinge, for checking on Junie's breathing because she'd had those scary pauses when she was congested. It was all true. It was also a kind of vigil I didn't know how to stop. Our backyard ended at a low wooden fence with a gate that latched with a stubborn click. Beyond that was a stretch of spartina grass and black water that turned gold at sunset and gray by 9 a.m. A narrow boardwalk ran through the marsh toward a viewing platform. People in the neighborhood used it for morning walks and birding. At high tide, the water came close enough that the wind carried a briny, sweet, rot smell up to our porch. The first time I saw it, I assumed it was a neighbor. It was around 3:30 a.m. I'd just gotten Junie back down, and I was standing at the kitchen window with a mug I'd reheated twice. The glass had that faint film from coastal humidity, no matter how often I wiped it. Out across the marsh, near the boardwalk, a figure stood with their back to me. I watched for a minute because anyone out there at that hour felt like an odd detail in the world. The figure shifted its weight and angled its shoulders, as if it had noticed movement in a window. Then, with a slow, careful motion, it raised an arm. I raised mine without thinking, half wave, half, hey. It matched me. The angle, the height, the pause at the top. A delayed shiver went through me, and I lowered my hand. The figure lowered its hand at the same pace. It didn't hurry. It didn't jump. It didn't do anything that would help my brain call it a joke. I waited for a porch light to flick on somewhere, for a phone to glow, for the world to give me a normal explanation. The figure remained where it was, posture settled, as if it could stand there until daylight made it irrelevant. Junie fussed in her crib, a small, hiccupy sound, and I turned away. When I looked back, the marsh was empty. The next night, I saw it again. I told myself not to, but after you see something once, your mind starts arranging your routine around the possibility. I did the dishes slower. I checked the lock twice. I paced the living room with my phone in my hand, not calling anyone, just holding it like a talisman. At 2:58 a.m., it was there. Farther right this time, closer to the water line, a silhouette against the lighter band of sky. It faced my house now. I stood very still, shoulders slightly hunched from being tired and cold in my own shirt. Across the marsh, the figure's shoulders hunched the same way. I straightened. It straightened. I leaned closer to the glass, like that would sharpen the distance. It leaned too. That's when I noticed something that bothered me more than the copying. It didn't have the casual looseness of a person who's simply standing outside. It looked arranged. Every joint seemed placed with intention, like it was practicing being seen. I told Erin in the morning, while she sat at the table and pushed cereal around a bowl she didn't eat from. "There's been someone on the boardwalk at night," I said. "Just standing." She blinked at me like I was speaking from another room. "Probably teenagers." "Maybe." I kept my voice calm. "It's just weird." Her eyes moved toward Junie in her high chair. Junie had drool shining on her chin and a little smear of banana across her knuckles. Erin watched her the way you watch something precious when you feel far away from it. "Can you take her to the appointment?" Erin asked. I can't do the waiting room today." I said yes. I meant it. In our house, fear had to take a number behind everything else. Over the next week, the figure became part of my nights the way the marsh sounds were part of the background. Present, persistent, impossible to ignore once you knew the shape of it. Some nights it stood near the boardwalk rail. Some nights it stood ankle deep in water on the mud flat at low tide. It always found a place where it could see my kitchen window. It always faced the house. And it always mirrored me. If I sat at the table with my head in my hands, it did the same. If I stood with one hip cocked because my back hurt, it shifted into the same imbalance. If I crossed my arms, it crossed its arms. There was a rhythm to it, like call and response. At first, the mirroring felt like mockery. Then it started to feel like study. It wasn't perfect in those early nights. The silhouette did the overall shape, the broad strokes. When I scratched the side of my neck, it lifted a hand too high, like it didn't know where the neck ended. When I turned to pour coffee, it turned, but its torso looked stiff, as if it didn't understand how a spine participates. Then, gradually, it got better. The shoulders rounded the way mine did when I was too tired to hold them up. The head tilt became subtler. The way it planted its feet began to look less like a stake in the ground and more like a person waiting for something. The change was slow enough that I couldn't mark the moment it happened. I only realized it when I looked out one night and my brain, for a split second, tried to call it human. It was standing closer than it had before, near the gate in our fence. The marsh between us was a dark quilt of grass and water channels, but the gate sat on our side of the property line, and the figure stood just beyond it, on the other side of the fence, as if the fence was a polite suggestion. I hadn't heard the latch. I hadn't heard footsteps. I had just looked up from my laptop and found it there. My skin tightened over my ribs. The figure faced me through the slats, and the porch light gave it shape in small pieces. An elbow, a collarbone, a forearm.
It had the wrong kind of thinness, a stretched out quality. The limbs looked too long for the torso, like a drawing where the proportions drift. It shifted its weight to its left foot. I shifted mine without meaning to, and then I froze, furious at myself for giving it anything. Across the fence, it held the posture, its head angled slightly, like it was waiting for the next instruction. I didn't wave. I didn't move. I kept my hands on the counter, fingers spread, anchoring myself in place. The figure lifted its hand anyway, slowly, palm toward me, fingers separated. The fingers were long and pale under the porch light, jointed like they were built from sticks. The hand pressed to the fence slat with a quiet, deliberate touch. I stepped back and my heel bumped the baseboard. It stepped back too. A soft sound came from upstairs. Junie shifting in her crib, the little grunt she made before she cried. My whole body tried to split in two directions, toward the stairs, toward the back door. The figure's head tilted toward the house. It held still for a beat, listening the way a parent listens. And then it tilted back toward me, and it did something that felt like the most intimate violation of the whole week. It adjusted itself into my stance again. Shoulders slightly forward, chin tucked. The exact posture I held when I hovered at Junie's crib checking for breath. As if it knew. As if it had been watching enough to learn what my worry looked like from the inside. I turned the kitchen light off. The room fell into dim reflection and shadow, and my own face disappeared from the glass. I backed away from the window and went to the stairs, taking them two at a time. Erin lay on her side with her back to the room, the shape of her curled inward. I paused in the doorway because I didn't want to add anything else to her already heavy world. Junie was awake, eyes wide and wet. She made a little squeaking cry that sounded like she didn't have energy for a full scream. I lifted her and held her against my chest. Her heartbeat fluttered fast under her sleep sack. I rocked her and felt her settle, the warmth of her cheek against my collarbone. Behind me, Erin's voice came soft and raw. "What's wrong?" "I saw someone by the fence," I said. I kept my tone even. "Probably a drunk guy from the boardwalk. I'm going to call someone." Erin pushed herself up on one elbow. In the dark, I could see her eyes, the way they had that distant sheen these days. "Right now?" "Yeah." I kissed Junie's head. "I'm fine." I took my phone into the hallway and dialed the non-emergency line with my thumb trembling. While it rang, I walked to the front of the house and glanced through the living room window toward the backyard. From that angle, I could see the fence line and the gate. The figure stood on our porch. It had crossed the yard without sound. It was close enough now that the porch light showed it in full, and the sight of it made my breath seize in my throat. Its posture was almost mine. It stood the way I stood when I tried to stay quiet, weight distributed to avoid creaks, shoulders held to keep my shirt from brushing the wall, head angled toward the stairwell. Its skin looked like wet clay stretched thin. Its face had a suggestion of features rather than real ones. A ridge where a nose should be, hollows where eyes might sit, a mouth line that seemed pressed into place. It raised one hand slowly. In that moment, in the soft yellow porch light, I realized what it was practicing. It was practicing being me. The dispatcher answered, and my voice came out steady because I had no other choice. "Hi," I said. "I'm at a house near the marsh off River Road. There's someone on my porch." Across the glass, the thing mirrored my posture. Phone hand lifted, head tipped slightly, shoulders tense. Then it took one small step toward the front door,
and it put its ear to the wood, like it was listening to my words. Junie whimpered upstairs. Aaron called my name, a thin thread of fear finally cutting through her fog. I kept my eyes on the porch. I kept my voice on the line. I described what I could without making it sound like a story. And as I talked, the replacement watcher stood there in the light, quietly rehearsing the shape of my life. Husband, father, man holding a house together at 3 a.m., as if it believed repetition could earn it a turn. The Hunter's Silence. Appalachian Stalking Horror. I eased my truck onto the gravel shoulder and cut the engine. The forest kept moving without it, wind working through the pines, a far-off creek talking to itself, a few late crows trading rough calls across the ridge. Dawn held the foothills in a cold grip. Frost glazed the weeds along the ditch line. My breath showed in small clouds as I stepped out and pulled the rifle case from the back seat. The air smelled like wet leaves and old wood. It smelled like home. I'd hunted these hills since I was old enough to carry a .22. I knew where the deer crossed, where the hogs rooted, where the turkey liked to roost. I knew the shortcuts that cut behind the old logging road and the pockets of laurel so thick you had to shoulder through like a man pushing into a crowd. I liked hunting alone because there was no noise to manage, no chatter, no boots scuffing out of rhythm, just my steps, my breathing, my decisions. In these woods, that mattered. Control mattered. I locked the truck, shouldered my pack, and started up the trail. Leaves crackled under my boots. Every sound had a shape in the cold air. A twig snapped with a sharp, clean edge. Loose gravel shifted with a faint grind. My pack strap squeaked once, and I adjusted it until it stayed quiet. A quarter-mile in, I stopped beside a beech tree and listened. The woods carried little sounds the way water carried light. Softly, scattered, always moving. A squirrel scratched at bark. Something small dug under leaves. A woodpecker tapped and then paused, as if considering the day. I breathed slow and even through my nose, letting the air warm before it hit my throat. I waited until my pulse settled. Then I heard footsteps. Not mine. They came from behind me, back down the trail. A steady crunch through leaf litter, a pace that held to the same tempo as my own walk. I froze. The steps slowed too. My neck tightened as I turned my head, bringing my eyes around first, rifle angled low, finger straight along the guard. The trail behind me ran between two lines of trees like a dark seam stitched through the brush. Frost glittered in the low light. Mist hung in thin layers near the ground. Nothing stood there. No hunter, no hiker, no shape moving through the gray. I held still long enough to feel the cold start biting through my gloves. Then I took one step forward. Behind me, leaf litter shifted again. Another crunch, another step. The sound stayed several yards back. It stayed tucked into the same lane of trail, patient and steady. I stopped and turned again. Still nothing. The woods behind me looked ordinary. Trees, brush, a few bare branches reaching into the pale sky. I kept moving, slower now, placing each foot so the leaves didn't break with a loud crack. The second set of steps followed. Crunch. Pause. Crunch. The rhythm matched my pace like we shared the same metronome. My first thought was another hunter. It made sense. People came up here, especially once word got out about the hogs. I'd crossed paths before. A man could follow the same trail and still be invisible for a while. I called out anyway. "Morning!" My voice sounded too big in the cold air. It pushed through the trees and faded. No answer came back. I walked another 100 yards and stepped off the trail onto a patch of mossy ground, letting my boots sink without noise. I stood still. The steps behind me came on, steady and unhurried. Crunch, crunch, crunch. Then they stopped. I turned fast and lifted the rifle slightly. The trail behind me stayed empty. A wind gust slid down the slope and moved through the laurel with a dry whisper. Something small scurried under leaves. The woodpecker tapped again. Then, after a pause long enough to make my teeth feel tight, the steps resumed. Crunch. Another step. Always behind. I eased back onto the trail and kept walking. The foothills rose gently, folding into themselves like waves. Old logging cuts made the land uneven, and the path narrowed as the trees thickened. I crossed a shallow run of water where the rocks were slick with algae. My boots splashed softly. Behind me, a splash followed. The second set of steps never hurried to catch up. It never lagged enough to lose the rhythm. It stayed in that same pocket of distance, far enough to stay out of clear view, close enough to keep pressure on the back of my neck. I tried to picture a man doing it, a hunter playing a joke, someone curious, someone stupid. My hands stayed warm from the work of holding the rifle, but my forearms felt tense. I could feel the muscles holding a readiness I hadn't chosen. I took a wide loop off the trail, pushing through a stand of rhododendron that clawed at my sleeves. The brush resisted, thick and springy. It made noise. It always made noise.
I forced my way through for 50 yards and then paused, chest rising and falling. My breath came out in sharper bursts. Behind me, leaves shifted. A branch bent. Something pushed through the same dense brush with the same patient pressure, like it knew the path I'd chosen and accepted it. I turned, staring into the green, dark tangle. The brush moved in small tremors. Leaves shook as something passed through. The movement came from low to high, as if a tall body slipped between branches and the plants had to make room. Then the movement stopped. The foliage settled. I saw no face, no outline, only the aftermotion of leaves finding their place again. I backed out to the trail, forcing myself to move at a normal pace. My mind reached for explanations, the way a hand reached for a railing in the dark. Another hunter stayed on my track. A bear shadowed me. A deer ran parallel. But the footfalls carried weight, a steady compression of leaves. The sound belonged to something upright, something that placed its feet with intent. I walked for another mile, climbing higher, moving past a split in the trail where one path cut toward a rocky overlook. I angled toward the overlook on purpose. I wanted open ground. I wanted space to see. The steps behind me followed. The distance never changed. As the light strengthened, the woods took on more color. Brown leaves, gray bark, green laurel. The frost began to soften. Water dripped from pine needles. I kept expecting to catch a glimpse. An elbow, a shoulder, a hat brim. Something that would turn this into a story about a rude stranger. Instead, the sound stayed clean and deliberate, and the trail behind me stayed empty. When I reached the logging road, it cut a pale strip through the forest, packed dirt with scattered gravel, wide enough for a truck if you had the nerve. The canopy opened above it, letting in a cold, bright light. I stepped onto the road and stopped. The sudden openness made me feel exposed, like I'd stepped out onto a stage. I turned fully and scanned down the trail where I'd come from. For the first time that morning, I saw it. It stood between the trees at the edge of the trail, partly in shadow, partly in the thin sunlight that slipped through branches.
It didn't step into the road. It held itself just inside the forest line. It was tall, taller than me by a head, maybe more. Its shoulders sat high and slightly forward, giving it a hunched look without bending at the waist. Its arms hung long, hands down near mid-thigh. The hands stayed relaxed, fingers slightly curled. Its head angled toward me, then shifted a few degrees, as if it watched from different points at once. I couldn't make out clear details of a face. The light hit it wrong, or my eyes refused to fix on it. The sense I got was of smoothness where features should have been, and a heaviness around the brow like a ridge. It breathed. I heard it across the road. Slow air drawing in, slow air releasing. A calm rhythm that carried through the stillness. I raised my rifle. The movement felt sudden, aggressive, and I expected a reaction. It gave none. It stepped forward. One foot placed onto leaves with care. The other followed. It crossed the threshold from shadow into dim light beneath the trees. It stayed in the forest line, still not stepping onto the road, still holding that distance like it belonged to it. The way it walked carried a specific patience. Each step rolled from heel to toe, weight shifting smoothly. No rush, no stumble, no hesitation. It moved like it had all day. I kept the rifle trained on its chest. "Who's there?" My voice came out rough. It continued walking along the forest edge, tracking the line of trees parallel to the road. Its path kept it behind me, to my left, maintaining the same spacing, like the distance was a rule. It angled its head again, listening. My throat felt dry. The world held its breath. Even the creek sound seemed farther away. I backed a step onto the road, gravel crunching. It matched the movement, taking another step in the leaves. I turned and started down the logging road toward a patch of open ground I knew would lead to an old clearing. My boots struck dirt and small stones. Behind me, leaves crunched again. It followed the road's path without stepping onto it, staying inside the tree line, always behind, always walking. The farther I went, the quieter the woods became. Bird calls thinned. The small movements under leaves stopped. The air took on a heavier smell, like damp earth turned over by a shovel. I checked my phone out of reflex. The screen lit. Bars drained to nothing. No service. I slid it back into my pocket and kept moving.
The clearing lay another half-mile down, where the logging road widened and then broke into a rough, open patch of low grass and weeds. A few old cut stumps stood there like blunt posts. The place had the flat openness I wanted. I reached the edge and stepped out. Wind moved across the clearing, cold and steady, flattening grass and waves. The sky above it looked pale and empty. I turned again, rifle up. It stood at the edge of the trees, still inside the shadow line, head tilted, shoulders high. Its breathing stayed slow. It stepped forward. A foot pressed down into leaves. The sound came clean and heavy. I held my aim steady, trying to force my hands to stay calm. It took another step. The distance closed by a yard. My pulse thudded in my ears. I took 2 steps backward into the clearing. The grass bent under my boots. The open space behind me felt like a wall made of air. No cover, no trees, no place to hide. It continued walking. Its arms swung slightly with each step. Its hands stayed loose. Its head remained angled toward me. It stopped at the edge of the clearing. For a moment, I thought it had decided to keep its line, to hold at the trees. Then it lifted 1 foot and stepped into the open.
The grass flattened under its weight. It moved into the clearing with the same calm, deliberate pace. Each step settled into the ground like a stamp. The sunlight hit it fully now, and I saw more. Texture, shape, movement. Its skin looked like bark soaked in water, dark, uneven, with a sheen in certain angles. It carried ridges along the forearms and neck. Its chest rose and fell with that slow breathing. Its head had a slope that reminded me of a skull under thick hide. No hair moved in the wind. No clothing, no gear. Only its body, built for walking through brush for as long as it wanted. It kept coming. I didn't fire. The decision stunned me as soon as it happened. My finger stayed outside the trigger guard, stiff and locked there. My arms held the rifle in place, but my mind carried a heavier pressure. I'd killed deer. I'd killed hogs. I'd put down a wounded animal. Those moments had shape. They had a beginning and an end. A clean choice. This felt different. This felt like aiming at something that didn't belong to the same set of rules. It closed another yard. I tried to speak again. Stop. It continued walking. Its breathing stayed steady, like a man taking a slow hike. It moved to my left slightly, changing angle. The shift placed it in a line that cut off my path back to the logging road. I turned my body to keep the rifle trained. My boots moved in the grass. The wind pushed against my jacket. It matched my rotation with a small turn of its torso, never jerking, never rushing, keeping the same calm pace. It shifted again, steering the angle. My heart hammered harder. I realized it had been doing this all morning. Subtle changes, small angle adjustments, always behind, always on a line that guided me where it wanted. The clearing began to feel smaller. I backed away farther, and the ground sloped gently downward. My boot hit a patch of loose dirt, and my heel slid. I caught myself, but the stumble broke the rhythm. My chest jerked forward, then back. It closed the distance again, still walking. Its steps grew louder now that it moved in open grass and dirt. The weight of it pressed sound into the ground. I tried to circle wide toward the right edge of the clearing where the trees thinned. It shifted with me, taking 2 steps that changed its position just enough to hold the line behind my shoulder. My breathing came faster, and I forced it down. In through the nose, out through the mouth. Slow. Even. It mirrored that calm with its own slow rhythm. Then it did something that made my stomach tighten. It paused. Only for a second. Then it resumed walking with the same pace, and the pause felt like a thought. Like it had chosen when to let me feel hope. My eyes flicked behind me, searching for cover, and I saw the ravine. It lay at the far edge of the clearing, hidden until you reached the slope. The ground fell away sharply into a steep cut, a gash lined with rock and tangled roots. The creek ran down there, louder now, rushing over stones. There was no easy way down. There was no easy way across. A man could break an ankle in seconds. I'd walked toward it without thinking, because the open ground felt safer than the trees. I'd walked exactly where it had guided me. It kept coming. 30 feet. 25. 20. I held the rifle up, hand shaking now, barrel centered on its chest. Its head tilted as if it listened to my breath. It closed to 15 feet. My arms burned from holding the aim. My shoulders cramped. It closed to 10. The smell hit me then. Wet wood, earth turned over, something metallic under it, like old pennies left in rain. It stopped. It stood in front of me, with the ravine behind my heels and the open clearing around us. Its breathing filled the space between us. Slow, measured, calm. I could see the rise and fall of its chest. I could see the small shift of its shoulders as the air moved in and out. I stood there, with my rifle and my control and my pride. And I realized the only thing I'd controlled all morning was my own direction. It took one step closer. The grass flattened under its foot. It leaned its head forward slightly, bringing that smooth, heavy face nearer. Its breath touched my hands, cool and damp. I didn't fire. I didn't speak. I stood there and listened to it breathe. And I matched my breath to its rhythm, because my body understood what my mind resisted. The woods had a hunter, and the hunter had been behind me the whole way. I watched it learn my name. This happened in late October of 2017, outside of Pittsboro, North Carolina. My cousin Derek had leased a stretch of wooded land near the Haw River. Officially, he was growing heirloom tomatoes. Unofficially, he had 3 tarp-covered patches tucked deep in the tree line. I wasn't proud of it, but I needed cash, and he needed help guarding the place at night. We rotated shifts. That week was mine. The land felt quiet in a way that pressed on your ears. Pine needles blanketed the ground, and the air carried that damp river smell. Metal and rot mixed together. We had a small camp set up about 200 yards from the plants. Folding chair, cooler, a thermos of burnt coffee, and a battery lantern that hummed faintly when you leaned close. The first 2 nights passed slow and empty. Deer moved through. Once, a barred owl drifted over the clearing and landed somewhere behind me. I kept a cheap .22 across my lap, more for comfort than use. The third night, just after midnight, I heard Derek's voice from the woods. Marcus. Clear, casual, about 30 yards out. I stood up so fast, the chair tipped. Derek was in Greensboro that week. I had dropped him at his apartment myself. Marcus, it said again, same tone, like he was calling me over to show me something. I stepped forward 2 paces before my brain caught up. The voice came from chest height in the trees. Too high for someone crouching. Too steady for someone drunk or joking. I turned the lantern toward the sound. The beam hit trunks and branches and a pale strip of something that slid sideways behind a pine. Not walking, sliding. The woods settled again. I kept the lantern up for a full minute. My hands shook hard enough that the light wobbled in tight circles. Nothing moved. I told myself somebody had wandered onto the property and was messing with me. Maybe a hunter. Maybe someone who had heard about the crop. I circled wide around the plants with the lantern raised and the rifle braced awkwardly against my shoulder. Every few steps I called out, steady voice, telling whoever it was to leave. No answer. When I came back to camp, the folding chair I had knocked over earlier was upright again. I froze there, staring at it. The dirt under the legs showed fresh indentations, deeper than before, Something had pressed down on it. I backed up slowly until my calves hit the cooler. That's when I heard breathing. Close. Just beyond the reach of the lantern. Long pulls of air, wet and patient. I swung the light toward it. It crouched at the edge of the beam, pale, too pale for moonlight. Skin stretched tight over ribs that showed even from that distance. Its arms were long enough that its fingers brushed the ground while it balanced on the balls of its feet. Its head tilted slightly, like it was measuring me. The face looked almost unfinished. Shallow eyes, thin mouth pulled wide in something that wasn't quite a smile. I lifted the rifle. My finger tightened without thinking. It copied the motion. Its arm rose slowly, mimicking the way I held the gun, elbow bent, invisible barrel pointed at me. My stomach dropped. "Marcus," it said again, softer this time. The voice sounded closer to mine now. It took one step forward into the light. Its knees bent backward more than they should have. The joints moved with a loose flexibility that made my own legs ache just watching. I fired. The crack split the clearing and echoed down toward the river. The thing jerked sideways before the sound fully faded, already moving. It crossed the distance between us faster than I could cycle the bolt. 1 second, it stood at the edge of the lantern beam. The next, it was beside the plants, low to the ground, long fingers raking through the leaves. It didn't look at me while it did it. It kept its head turned slightly, as if listening for something behind me. Then it darted into the trees. The plants swayed for a few seconds after it vanished. I stood there with the rifle half raised, waiting for it to circle back. It didn't. I packed the camp in under 5 minutes, left the chair, left the cooler. I drove out of there with the headlights off until I hit the dirt road. Derek came back the next morning to check the damage. Half the plants were shredded. Not eaten, just torn apart, stems peeled open and scattered. He asked me what happened. I told him someone had found the grow and vandalized it. I kept my voice flat and steady. He studied me for a long time before nodding. That night in my apartment, I lay in bed replaying the way it lifted its arm to match mine. I understood something then. It hadn't come for the plants. It had come to practice. 2 weeks later, Derek called me. He said someone had been walking around his apartment complex after midnight. Neighbors complained about a man standing near the dumpsters, repeating people's names in a low voice. Derek laughed when he told me, said it sounded like a drunk. Then he paused. "Hey," he said, "you ever tell anybody about that night out there?" My mouth went dry. "No," I said. On the other end of the line, I heard breathing. Slow, wet, close to his phone. Then my own voice, faint and careful. "Marcus?" The call cut off there. Derek moved out 3 days later. I still live in North Carolina. Sometimes, late at night, when the wind hits the siding just right, I hear my name from the tree line behind my apartment. It always sounds a little more like me each time. The Mimic in the Pines, rural Johnston County. I live off Highway 50, past the soybean fields, where the pavement thins into gravel and the gravel turns into red Carolina clay. The land flattens out here. Pines rise straight and patient, their trunks tall as cathedral columns. At night, the woods breathe resin, and warm earth. Cicadas stitch a steady rhythm into the dark. My house sits alone at the end of a long drive. A single porch light hums above the steps. Beyond that light, the pines gather close, trunks spaced just wide enough to walk between. I moved here for quiet. The first time I heard it, I thought it was an echo. I had stepped off the porch with a mug of coffee, steam curling into the night air. I remember saying, soft and casual, "It's peaceful out here." From the trees, maybe 20 yards in, something answered. "It's peaceful out here." Same tone, same rhythm, same breath between words. The voice sounded like mine played back from a recorder. Clean, measured, familiar. I stood still. The cicadas carried on. Wind moved high in the needles. I said, "Who's there?" From the dark, 2 seconds later, "Who's there?" The mug trembled in my hand. Coffee rippled to the rim. A figure stood between two pines, thin, long-limbed, pale against the bark. It crouched low, its shape folded inward, its head tilted at a curious angle. It never stepped closer. I whispered, "Stop." From the trees, "Stop." The sound landed in my chest like a second heartbeat. I walked backward onto the porch and shut the door. The porch light hummed. The glass reflected my face. For a moment, I saw only myself and the living room behind me. Then, in the glass reflection, over my shoulder, I saw it again, still at the tree line, head tilted, watching. The next night, I recorded myself speaking into my phone. I stood on the porch and said, "Testing, 1, 2, testing." 2 seconds later, "Testing, 1, 2, testing." Same cadence, same slight rise at the end. I replayed the recording. My voice. Then the mimic's voice. They matched. I tried something else. I spoke in a whisper I had never used before, tight and strained. "You don't belong here." From the pines, "You don't belong here." It delivered the sentence with my exact strain, the same dryness in the throat, the same press of teeth against tongue. A thin silhouette shifted behind it. Another shape stood deeper in the woods. Both figures held distance. Both heads tilted. I felt a slow spreading warmth behind my eyes, the sensation of a headache forming. The air felt thicker, denser, as though the woods absorbed oxygen and held it close. I said, "You can't be me." From the trees, "You can't be me." The second voice came from farther left. "You can't be me." 3 seconds between each repetition, each one mine. On the third night, I stayed inside and spoke in the kitchen with the lights on. "I know what you're doing." Through the closed windows, faint and clear, "I know what you're doing." I gripped the counter. "You're copying me. You're copying me." The reply slid through the glass as if the pain offered no barrier. I walked to the bathroom and shut the door. I looked at my reflection under the bright vanity lights. I touched my face. My skin felt warm and solid. I opened my mouth and said, "I am here." From outside, through 2 walls and a hallway. I am here. The voice carried weight now. It sounded grounded, full. My phone buzzed in my pocket. A text notification. I pulled it out. It was from my own number. I am here. I stared at the message. The timestamp showed seconds ago. Another message appeared. I am here. My hands felt distant from me, like I controlled them through gloves filled with sand. I typed back, "Who is this?" 3 dots appeared. Then, "Who is this?" The phone slipped from my grip and hit the tile. The next evening, I did not wait for dark. I walked into the pines while the sun still hung low. Orange light filtered through the trunks. The ground felt soft under my boots. I said, loud and steady, "Show yourself." From somewhere ahead, "Show yourself." It stood 50 yards away, long arms touching the ground, back bent, face smooth and pale, eyes wide and unblinking. Another one stood to my right, and another behind me, all at distance, all silent until I spoke. I am not afraid. 3 voices answered, staggered. I am not afraid. I am not afraid. I am not afraid. The words sounded truer coming from them. The figures shifted positions without crossing the space between us. They glided sideways between trunks, always maintaining the same radius. I tried something else. I screamed. The forest erupted with my scream a second later. Then again. Then again. A chorus of my own terror ricocheted through the trees. The sound wrapped around me and pressed inward. The forest erupted with my scream a second later. Then again. Then again. A chorus of my own terror ricocheted through the trees. The sound wrapped around me and pressed inward. I clamped my hands over my ears. The echoes continued inside my skull. I turned and ran back toward the house. The gravel drive came into view. The porch light flicked on automatically as the sun dropped lower. Behind me, a wave of my own footfalls thundered in perfect rhythm. That night, I did not speak. I moved through the house in silence. I kept my mouth closed. I breathed through my nose. At 11:43 p.m., the first knock came. 3 gentle taps on the front door. I stayed still. 3 taps again. Then, from the porch, my voice. "Let me in." Soft. Calm. "Let me in." A second voice layered over the first. "Let me in." A third, slightly delayed. I stepped toward the door. My hand hovered over the knob. Through the peephole, I saw the yard lit by the porch light. Pines swayed at the edge of illumination, and there, at the very boundary of the light, stood a figure shaped exactly like me. Same height, same shoulders, same posture. Its face looked smooth and pale, like wet clay waiting for detail. It spoke. "Open the door." From farther back, the other figures repeated. "Open the door. Open the door." I felt my throat tighten. My mind searched for words and found none. The figure's face began to shift. Eyes deepened. Nose formed. Lips pressed into place. My lips. My eyes. It watched me through the peephole. Then it smiled. "Open the door," it said. Behind it, the others echoed. Open the door. Open the door. Open the door. The voices no longer felt like imitations. They felt like rehearsals. I stepped away from the door. The knocking stopped. Silence filled the house. I did not sleep. At 3:12 a.m., I heard my own voice from the living room. I am here. I had not spoken. The voice came again, closer. I am here. Footsteps moved down the hallway, slow, measured, matching my stride. I am here. The bathroom mirror reflected the doorway behind me. A shadow passed across the frame. I watched my reflection. My reflection blinked. I had not blinked. My reflection's mouth opened. I am here. The sound came from inside the room. I felt something shift in my chest, a sensation like a chair sliding across a wooden floor. My reflection raised its hand. I kept mine still. It pressed its palm to the glass from the inside. The mirror's surface rippled. For a moment, I saw pine trunks stretching behind the reflection, as if the forest stood within the glass. The figure that wore my face leaned forward. "Step out," it whispered. From beyond the mirror, layered and distant. "Step out. Step out." I felt the floor under my feet change, softening into soil. The scent of pine filled my lungs. The house seemed thinner. The woods felt nearer. My reflection smiled again. "You live out there," it said. In the distance, the other voices repeated. "You live out there. You live out there." The mirror brightened. The bathroom light dimmed. I lifted my hand. The reflection mirrored me, palm to palm, glass between us. The surface felt warm. Behind the reflection, the pines stretched endlessly, and dozens of figures stood among them, all shaped like me, all waiting. My mouth opened. I heard myself say, steady and calm, "I am here." From somewhere far away, from inside the house, from inside the woods, from inside the mirror, my voice answered, "I am here." And I realized I no longer knew which one spoke first. Mile marker 319. My name's Daniel Mercer. Most people in the district call me Danny. I'm 38, and I've worn a North Carolina highway patrol patch for 12 years. Long enough to know what I can fix on the roadside and what I can't. Right now, I'm running on burnt coffee and 4 hours of sleep spread across 2 days. Divorce paperwork is sitting on my kitchen table under a pile of unopened mail. Promotion testing is in 3 weeks, and I'm behind on the study guide because when I close my eyes, my brain stays on duty. That's why I'm on solo night patrol on I-40. Part of it is staffing. One trooper called out sick, another got pulled to a wreck investigation, and the sergeant needed a unit covering the interstate stretch between the county line and the Raleigh Belt Line. Part of it is me. I volunteered for overtime because overtime keeps me busy, and busy keeps me from circling the same thoughts until sunrise. At 0047, I rolled onto I-40 eastbound at exit 295, merged into the thin flow of late traffic, and settled in behind a tractor-trailer long enough to let my radar unit warm up. The cruiser is a black and silver Ford Explorer police interceptor with a worn spot on the steering wheel where my thumb rests. Center console holds the light controls, siren head, and radio mic. The mobile data terminal sits angled toward me like a little windshield inside the windshield, running CAD and DMV checks. Behind my right shoulder, there's a rack with a shotgun and an AR locked in place, and in front of my face, there's the faint reflection of the dash camera LED. Normal sounds. Tire hum, air vent hiss, the occasional radio burst. District 2, be advised. Debris in roadway, I-40 East, mile marker 302, right lane. DOT notified. Copy, I said, thumbed the mic. 241, I'll check it. Dispatch calls me 241 because that's my unit tonight. They use plain language most of the time now. The old 10 codes still sneak in during stress, but on nights like this, it's mostly calm voices and mile markers. I moved to the right lane, slowed to 60, and watched for whatever debris meant. Tire tread, ladder, cooler, somebody's Friday night mistake. The overhead lighting along this stretch comes in patches. A bright pool under an overpass, then darkness, then another pool. The median is a strip of grass with cable barrier. Beyond the shoulders, it's pines and scrub and the kind of blackness that swallows a flashlight beam. At mile marker 301, just past a low concrete bridge, my headlights caught something pale at the edge of the right shoulder. Not an animal. Too tall. Not reflective like a deer. Not moving like a person. It was upright, slightly bent forward, like someone who'd been standing too long and forgot how to straighten their back. It didn't step into the roadway. It didn't wave. It didn't flinch. It was simply there, facing my cruiser. By the time my brain tried to label it, pedestrian, stranded motorist, intoxicated, the moment was already behind me. I checked my side mirror. Nothing but darkness and my taillights fading red. 241, dispatch said. DOT confirms debris is a shredded tire. Right lane. Advise when clear. Copy, I replied. I didn't mention the pale figure. Yet. A trooper calling in something pale and tall at midnight on I-40 doesn't earn you quick respect. At mile marker 302, I found the tire tread in the right lane. 2 long strips like black snakes. I hit my rear flashers, angled the cruiser onto the shoulder, and stepped out with my vest on. Traffic was light, but even one car at 70 miles an hour is enough to turn you into a headline if you misjudge it. I kept my body in the shadow of the rear quarter panel, grabbed one end of the tread, and dragged it off the lane into the grass. The smell of hot rubber hung in the air. Back in the driver's seat, I logged debris removed on the MDT and pulled back onto the interstate. 3 miles later, near mile marker 306, my headlights caught it again. Same posture, same pale, hairless silhouette. Upright but slightly bent. Motionless. On the right shoulder, just beyond the white line, in that narrow band where gravel meets grass, facing me. It wasn't a person in a hoodie. The light hit skin, not fabric. It looked wrong in the way a mannequin looks wrong when you see it in a field. I slowed without meaning to. The radar readout dropped with my speed, numbers stepping down as my foot eased off the gas. The thing didn't move. It watched, if watching is the right word for a face I couldn't resolve at that distance. I passed it. I checked mirrors. Darkness. My mouth tasted like metal. I keyed the mic. District 241. Go ahead. Any calls of a pedestrian on I-40 eastbound? Around mile 301 to 306. A pause. I could hear paper rustle, a keyboard click.
Negative, dispatch said. No bolos, no stranded. You need EMS? No, I said. Just checking. Copy. I ran through the practical list. If there's a pedestrian on the interstate at night, it's usually a wreck victim, a drunk, or somebody walking from a broken down car. I hadn't seen any disabled vehicles. No flares, no hazards, no silhouette of a car pulled into the grass. I told myself it was a trick of angle and light, a signpost, a pale tree trunk, a shoulder marker catching my beams the wrong way. Then, at mile marker 311, there it was again. Same spot relative to the lane, same forward bend, same facing.
In the same instant my headlights reached the shoulder, the pale shape existed as if it had been waiting for my beams to make it real. It was impossible in the boring, arithmetic way. From 306 to 311 is 5 miles. A human can't cover that distance in the time it took me to drive it unless they ran down the shoulder at Olympic speed. And I hadn't seen anything moving between. No silhouette in the dark, no flash of pale skin in my peripheral vision. Nothing in my mirrors. I set the cruiser's cruise control at 65 and watched the mile markers count up. The night felt thicker, like the air itself was absorbing sound. 241, I said on the radio again, more careful this time. Can you check DOT cameras at the overpasses between mile 305 and 312? I'm getting repeated, possible pedestrian sightings. Stand by, dispatch replied. I'll request. I flicked on my dash camera event marker, one button that flags the current recording so it's easier to locate later. A little beep, a mundane sound that made me feel less alone. At mile marker 316, it appeared again. The dread hit in a clean, cold line. Not panic, not adrenaline. More like the certainty you get when you watch a car drift across the center line toward you and you realize the driver is asleep. I couldn't make it make sense. I had driven forward. It should be behind me. That's how roads work. I signaled right, eased onto the shoulder, and stopped with my wheels straight. I didn't turn on the light bar, just the rear flashers. I didn't want to announce myself to whoever or whatever this was. I wanted it to be a normal person so badly that my hands shook on the steering wheel. The headlights cut forward, brightening the lane and shoulder ahead. No pale shape, just asphalt, grass, and pines. District 2 to 241, dispatch said. DOT states their camera feed is intermittent in that corridor. No visual confirmed. Advise what you're seeing. I swallowed. I stopped myself. Chose words like they were evidence. I've seen what looks like a person on the right shoulder multiple times. Same description. No vehicle nearby. Copy, dispatch said, voice still calm but tighter. Do you want a second unit? I looked at the empty passenger seat. My assigned partner tonight was a blank space. Negative for now, I said. I'll try to get eyes. I pulled back into the right lane and continued east. At mile marker 319, the overhead lighting was worse. The stretch dipped slightly, and the trees pressed close. There was an overpass ahead, its concrete underside a darker rectangle against the sky. That's where it was. Not at the edge of my headlights. Not a distant suggestion. It stood within the full wash of my high beams, on the shoulder, close enough that my mind couldn't blur it into a mistake. It was tall, taller than me, thin in a way that didn't read as malnourished so much as unfinished. Pale skin that looked almost wet, arms hanging too long at its sides, head tilted just enough to imply a neck that shouldn't bend that way. The face was forward, toward the cruiser, but it didn't have features that held. Every time I tried to focus, my eyes slid away like they were avoiding a bright light. It held the exact same posture I'd seen at 301, 306, 311, 316. Slightly bent, motionless, facing me. I brought the cruiser to a stop in the lane without thinking, then corrected, eased onto the shoulder behind it, giving myself distance, keeping the vehicle between us. My foot hovered over the brake. My hand went to the spotlight control. The beams snapped out, white and hard, and pinned the figure at the edge of the road. Nothing changed. It didn't flinch. It didn't blink. It simply accepted the light. The silence inside the cruiser got loud. Even the radio seemed to hold its breath. I keyed the mic with my knuckle because my hand didn't feel steady. District 241. I have eyes on the subject at mile 319. Requesting supervisor. Copy, dispatch said immediately. Supervisor en route. Maintain safety. I kept the spotlight on it. The beam trembled slightly because my wrist was tired. The figure remained exactly as it was, like it had been placed there.
And then, without any step, without any shift, without any motion I could perceive, it was not there. The spotlight beam hit empty grass. The shoulder was bare. My high beams lit nothing but asphalt and a reflective mile marker post. My stomach lurched like I'd missed a stair. I sat there, breathing, waiting for the normal explanation to walk out of the trees. Nothing came. 241, dispatch called. Status? It's gone, I said, and hated how small that sounded. Copy, dispatch replied. Supervisor is still en route. Hold position if safe. I should have held. That's procedure. When you have an unknown person on the interstate, you don't go hunting into the woods alone at night. You wait for backup. You keep your scene contained. But the fear wasn't of the woods. The fear was the road ahead. I drove anyway. I merged back into the right lane and kept my eyes locked on the shoulder, on the next pool of darkness, on every reflective post. My hands ached from gripping the wheel too hard. Mile marker 323. Exit sign overhead. The overpass beyond it. And there it was again. Upright, slightly bent, on the shoulder. Except this time, it wasn't on the shoulder. It was on the overpass. Centered above the eastbound lanes, on the pedestrian walkway that shouldn't have been accessible from the interstate side without climbing fences and concrete. It stood behind the metal guardrail, pale in my headlights, facing down at the cruiser as if it had been waiting for me to look up. Same posture, same stillness. A position it could not physically reach in the time it took me to drive there, and a place it had no reason to be. My brain offered one last practical thought. Hallucination, exhaustion, insomnia. A man alone in a cruiser at 2 a.m, seeing patterns that aren't there. Then the MDT clock blinked and changed. 0 to 11. Then, like a glitch, 0258. I stared at it hard enough to make my eyes water. The time stayed. The radio crackled and dispatch sounded wrong, too distant, like they were calling from the bottom of a well. 241, supervisor arrived at your last known at mile 319. He's not seeing you. Confirm location. My mouth opened. No sound came out for a second. I'm at mile 323, I said finally. Eastbound, under the overpass. A long pause. 241, dispatch said. Your CAD shows you still at mile 319. There's no traffic stop logged, no movement. Are you okay? I looked up again. The overpass walkway was empty. The mile marker posts slid by in my peripheral vision as if I were still rolling, but I realized the cruiser was stopped, parked, engine idling. My foot was on the brake. My pulse was in my ears. When the horizon started to gray and the first commuters began to appear,
the world snapped back into its usual shape. By then, the supervisor had found me, lights flashing, face drawn tight. He asked if I'd hit my head. He asked if I'd been drinking. He asked if I needed EMS. I told him the truth, stripped down to procedure. Multiple sightings of a possible pedestrian, unable to locate, intermittent camera feeds, time discrepancy. I didn't say pale. I didn't say upright. I didn't say it was on the overpass looking down at me. At the district office later, the dashcam footage was there, but it wasn't right. It showed my cruiser at mile marker 319 with the spotlight on empty grass. It showed me sitting motionless, engine running, hands on the wheel. It did not show the figure. The video timestamp ran continuously from 0209 to 0258. 49 minutes of me not moving, not speaking, not calling dispatch, just sitting with my headlights spilling into the dark. My radio log showed 3 transmissions I didn't remember making, all timestamped 0213, all tagged to the same GPS point at mile marker 319. My odometer reading suggested I'd traveled nearly 20 miles in the same window. Out by the shoulder at mile marker 323, where the overpass crosses, there were tire tracks pressed into the damp grass past the fog line, like I'd rolled off the road and corrected. The tracks started and stopped with no arc, no approach, like the cruiser had been set down there and lifted away. I stood on that shoulder after my shift ended, morning sun turning the pines ordinary again, and watched cars rush east toward Raleigh. The mile marker post gleamed in the light, 323. I tried to rehearse the story the way we do in court. Facts only, no interpretation. But every version ended in the same place. Something stayed ahead of me that should have been behind me, and it never had to move.
The daylight dock sighting, Outer Banks.
At 3:07 p.m., the sun burned white over the sound, flattening everything into glare and shimmer. Cal was filleting bluefish on the dock when the pelicans lifted off the water all at once. They rose in a loose spiral and drifted inland as if the tide had quietly changed direction. He wiped his hands on his apron and looked up. Something stood in the water, waist deep, 30 yards out, upright. At first he took it for a clamor waiting too far from shore. Then he noticed it hadn't moved in the time it took him to squint and focus. The tide rolled against it and split around its body like water flowing past a piling. It faced the dock. The shoulders were narrow and sloped. The arms hung long, nearly brushing the surface. Its skin held the color of soaked driftwood, pale and grainy in the bright afternoon light. Cal stepped closer to the edge. "You good out there?" he called. The head turned slightly, angling toward the bait shop behind him, as though something there had caught its attention. 2 teenagers walked down the boardwalk, with rods and a Bluetooth speaker humming faint music. Cal gestured toward the water. "Y'all seeing that?" They followed his gaze. They studied the shallows with polite concentration. The girl's brow creased. "Seeing what?" Cal looked back at the figure. It remained, motionless, waist deep, facing the dock. The boy shrugged. "Just the water." They continued past him, the music fading. A charter boat moved behind the figure, engine steady. Its wake rolled outward in bright, folding lines. When the swell reached the standing shape, the water bent around it in a smooth arc and rejoined on the other side without a splash. Cal felt a tightening along his ribs. Earl was at the next slip, untangling a line. "You catching that?" Cal asked, nodding toward the shallows. Earl leaned up and stared straight out across the water. He scanned slowly, blinking against the sun. "Heat's rough today," Earl said. "Drink some water." The figure shifted. It stepped forward. The motion carried no spray. The surface accepted the movement with a soft, sliding ripple. Another step. The waterline lowered to mid-thigh. Cal's heartbeat drummed in his ears. He watched the arms hang steady, the hands elongated, the fingers holding a strange, jointed stillness. A family wandered onto the dock. A mother, a father, a boy gripping a crab net. The boy paused and pointed toward the water. Cal felt his throat tighten. The boy stared at the shape for several long seconds. His mouth opened slightly. "Daddy?" he said, his voice soft and puzzled. "Why's that post out there?" The father squinted into the glare. "There's nothing out there, buddy." The boy's eyes lingered on the figure. The figure tilted its head. The boy blinked, and his expression smoothed. "Never mind," he said. They walked on. The standing shape continued forward with slow, deliberate steps. The water rested at its thighs, then just above its knees. A woman stretched on a towel near the sand. She lifted herself onto her elbows and gazed toward the shallows. Her eyes tracked across the water, passed over the figure, and settled back on the horizon. She lowered herself onto the towel again. Cal lifted his phone and aimed the camera toward the water. On the screen, sunlight, ripples, the shimmer of distant boats. He lowered the phone. The figure remained in the shallows. He raised the phone again. Only water. He lowered it once more. The figure stood there, closer now, the details sharper, the smoothness of its face, skin drawn taut over features that seemed pressed inward, as if shaped from beneath by something unfamiliar. Its head turned toward him. He felt a steady pressure at the back of his skull, like a warm palm resting there. A thought drifted into him with quiet certainty. Sunlight plays tricks. Water shifts shapes. The tide builds illusions. He swallowed and held his gaze on it. The figure stepped again. The water reached just below its knees, 10 yards from the dock. The lapping against its body carried a faint, muffled texture, like cloth brushing cloth beneath the surface. Earl's footsteps approached from behind. "You look pale," Earl said. Cal kept his eyes fixed on the shallows. "Tell me what you see." Earl followed his line of sight. He studied the empty stretch of water, then looked back at Cal with mild concern. "Blue sky and tide," Earl replied. The pressure at the back of Cal's skull deepened. The edges of his certainty softened, as if something inside his mind were being filed down carefully. The figure stood in the water and regarded him. The sun reflected off the surface in sharp, white fragments. Cal's eyes burned. He blinked. When he looked again, the shallows held only the tide. The pelicans drifted back down. A jet ski carved a bright arc across the sound. The water shimmered in familiar patterns. Earl clapped him lightly on the shoulder. "You sure you're good?" Cal stared at the empty stretch of water. He felt a hollow space where something had stood. "Yeah," he said. "Must have been the glare." He returned to his fillet table and resumed cutting. The blade moved cleanly through bluefish, steady and practiced. Across the sand, the boy with the crab net slowed. He glanced back toward the shallows. His head tilted slightly. He held the angle for a moment, as if listening to something distant. Then he straightened and followed his parents down the beach, while the afternoon sun burned bright over the water. The Rake at summer camp. The one that walks backward. I realized my bunk was short one kid before I realized the door had been left open. It was 2:17 a.m., and the air inside cabin Juniper had that thick, sour-sweet smell of wet socks and sunscreen that never truly leaves wood walls in July. My flashlight beam swept across the bunks, top, bottom, catching the pale shine of forearms, the rise and fall of sleeping chests, a stuffed animal hanging by one ear. Bunk 7, bottom, was empty. The sleeping bag was unzipped like a mouth. The pillow had slid toward the wall. No shoes beneath it. No crumpled hoodie at the foot like every other bed. Just bare plywood and my stomach dropping through it. I counted again anyway, lips moving without sound. 9. It should have been 10. I stepped to the door and the screen was ajar, the little hook not latched. Beyond it, the gravel path that ran between the cabins was a pale ribbon in the moonlight. Mist sat low in the valley, the way it always did here, like the camp had been poured into a shallow bowl and the air pooled at the bottom. I knew the rules because I'd said them 1,000 times this week. Buddy system. No wandering. If you have to go to the bathroom, you wake a counselor. Flashlight checks at lights out. Whistle signals. 1 blast for attention. 2 for gather. 3 for emergency. And I also knew the truth. We were understaffed. 2 counselors had quit on Sunday. The assistant director was in his office asleep on a cot because he'd been covering kitchen duty and waterfront all day. I was supposed to be on a lightly supervised shift, which meant I had a radio that sometimes worked and a laminated map that assumed children behaved like lines on paper. I whispered the name anyway, like it might come back to the bed if I said it gently. Eli. Nothing moved. Outside, the woods began where the light from the path died, 30 yards from Juniper Steps if you cut across the open grass. Maybe 40 if you followed the gravel past the fire pit and the rope course. The tree line was a jagged black wall. Past it, trunks, rhododendron thickets, a creek somewhere, and then miles of Appalachians rolling away under mist. I grabbed my whistle, clipped it to my collar, and stepped onto the porch. The night had sound the way a room has furniture. Crickets, distant frogs, the creek, faint but steady. Somewhere far off, a metal clank. Wind moving a pulley on the rope course, I told myself. The silhouette of the climbing tower stood against the sky like a rib cage. My boots hit the steps, and I stopped. A kid was standing in the grass. Not running, not sneaking. Just standing there, barefoot, in a t-shirt that hung too big on his shoulders, staring straight ahead into the dark. Not Eli. Mason. 8 years old. The one who asked if I had a girlfriend and then told me I should because girls make you calm. Mason, I said, soft. Hey, buddy, what are you doing out here? He didn't look at me. His face was slack, not asleep exactly, but not awake the way I wanted him to be. His arms hung at his sides. His feet were planted like he'd been set down there. I took a step off the porch. Mason, come back inside. He didn't move. My first thought was sleepwalking. My second was the bathroom. My third was the empty bunk behind me, and the way the screen door had been unhooked. I crossed the grass and knelt in front of him, trying to catch his eyes. Mace, Can you hear me?" He blinked once, slow, like a lizard in the sun. Then, without changing expression, he turned and began to walk toward the tree line. Calmly, quietly, like he was following a counselor on a nature hike. "Mason," my voice cracked. I reached for his arm. The rule we hammered into everyone was no grabbing unless it's an emergency. I had spent the last 2 weeks proving to myself I deserved this job, that I could be the steady one, that I wasn't the guy who always needed someone else to catch the details for him. My phone buzzed in my pocket with a text I hadn't answered all day. My girlfriend. Another, "Are you okay?" Another, "We need to talk when you're back." Like my real life was waiting on the other side of the mountains with its own head count, and I was failing that too. I didn't think about any of that when my fingers closed around Mason's wrist. His skin was cool and damp. He let me turn him like a shopping cart. No resistance. No complaint. He just faced the cabin again, blank as a photograph. "Inside," I said. "We're going inside." I guided him back up the steps, nudged him through the door, and eased him toward his bunk. He climbed in without looking at it and lay down in the wrong direction, head at the foot. I pulled the sleeping bag up over him. He didn't pull it back. I latched the screen hook with my whole hand, hard enough to make it rattle.
Then I turned to bunk 7 again. Empty. My radio was clipped to my belt. I pressed the talk button. "This is Juniper," I whispered. "I'm missing one camper. I need..." Static answered me. A hiss. A pop. I pressed again, jaw tight. "Juniper to admin. Copy?" Nothing. A bead of sweat rolled down my spine. I wanted to wake the other kids. I wanted to blow the whistle, 3 blasts, light up the whole camp. I imagined kids pouring out of cabins into the dark, terrified, crying. I imagined the director stumbling out half asleep. I imagined my name attached to chaos. So I did the stupid thing instead. I decided I could handle it. I took my flashlight and stepped back outside, pulling the door gently shut behind me so it wouldn't squeal. On the path, the gravel crunched too loud under my boots. I angled my beam low, searching for small footprints, a dropped sock, anything that made this make sense. The mist shifted in the valley. The rope course tower loomed on my left. The fire pit was a circle of stones with faint embers still breathing red from the staff hangout earlier. I could smell cold smoke. I cut toward the bathrooms, 2 wooden structures with solar lights that barely worked. Nothing. Empty. No swinging door. No whispered giggle. I swung back toward Juniper, my heart doing something ugly. As my beam swept the grass again, I froze. There were 3 of them now. 3 kids standing in a loose line, 20 feet from the cabin, facing the woods. Not talking, not fidgeting, like they were waiting for permission. "Okay," I said under my breath, more to myself than to them. "No, no, no." I went to the closest, a girl in a pink camp shirt. Sadie. She had cried at lunch because her mom didn't pack enough snacks. "Sadie." I touched her shoulder. She didn't flinch. Her eyes were open and unfocused, pointed towards something beyond the tree line. The beam of my flashlight caught the shine of her pupils and made them look like glass. "Sadie, you're outside," I said, trying to sound normal, like this was a routine correction. "We're going back in, right now." She stepped forward, one slow pace, like my words were a breeze and her body was a leaf. The other 2 stepped too. All 3, in sync,
I moved in front of them and held my hands out the way we were trained to during games. Stop! They kept walking. I backed up automatically, keeping myself between them and the woods. The open grass between Juniper and the tree line felt suddenly small, like a hallway. My flashlight beam swung past their shoulders and hit the edge of the forest. And there, where the trunk started and the underbrush made a dark lattice, something stood half in shadow. It was tall, but not in a human way. Long-limbed, thin, pale where moonlight touched it through the branches. The outline wasn't clean. It looked wrong against the straight trunks, like a stain that didn't belong on the picture. It wasn't running. It wasn't crouching. It wasn't doing anything dramatic. It was simply there, close enough that the kids could reach the tree line in maybe 10 more steps. The thing took one slow step backward into the shadows as the children advanced. My throat tightened so hard my swallow didn't work. The children kept walking. "Hey!" I snapped, louder than I meant to. "Stop! Turn around!" They didn't. The pale figure at the tree line moved again, one measured step back, as if it were making room for them, as if it wanted them to come, as if the distance mattered. I tried to convince myself it was a tree, a trick of my beam, a counselor out on a late check. But then it turned its head, not toward the kids, toward me. The flashlight caught the plane of its face, and my brain tried to give it features and failed. The eyes were there, dark, fixed, not blinking. It held steady eye contact with me, like it had been waiting for me to notice. The kids drifted forward, quiet as sleep. I moved. I grabbed the nearest child, Sadie, around the shoulders and pivoted her back toward the cabin, using my body like a shield. She didn't fight. She didn't cry. She just allowed it, like her will had been placed somewhere else, and she was on autopilot. "Mason," I said, scanning faces. "Sadie. Liam." Liam. He was one of the twins. I couldn't tell which in this light. I put my hand out to stop them, and my palm hit Liam's chest. He kept walking into my hand as if it wasn't there. His small body pressed forward with gentle insistence. Not force, not struggle, like a magnet pulling a paperclip. "Back," I said, now fully scared. "Back, back, back." I started physically pulling them, one at a time, guiding, then tugging. My whistle bumped my throat. My radio dug into my hip. My flashlight beam shook, darting between their blank faces and the tree line. The figure retreated with each child I turned away, always slow, always backward. No rush, no frustration, no reaction at all besides maintaining the distance and the stare. It kept looking at me, not at them, as if the kids were just moving parts, as if the only real interaction was between it and me. I got two of them turned around and halfway back to Juniper Steps when I saw the third one was farther out than I'd thought. A small shape near the edge of the grass, closer to the first line of trunks. Bare feet at the threshold of shadow. Not one of mine. Not from Juniper. A kid in a different shirt color. Maple cabin. He stood with his head tipped slightly, like he was listening. And the thing at the tree line had backed up enough that only a pale shoulder and one long arm were visible now. The rest was swallowed by the woods. But its face, its eyes, were still aimed straight at me through the branches. I felt something cold and certain settle in me. It never touches them, I thought. And I didn't know why that thought came with terror instead of relief. "Hey!" I called,
voice breaking on the word. "Hey, buddy!" The boy took one more step forward. The grass ended. Leaf litter began. The woods breathed him in. I ran. Not toward the tree line like some hero in a movie. Toward the boy. Because he was a body with a name I didn't know yet. And my job was bodies and names and keeping them inside lines. My boots pounded the grass. The mist made everything feel farther away. My beam bounced over roots and ferns. The boy didn't run. He didn't even speed up. He walked calmly into the woods. When I reached him, I grabbed his backpack strap because he had one on. Like he'd packed. Like he'd been ready. My fingers closed and I yanked. He stumbled back 1/2 step onto the grass. In that same instant, the pale figure shifted deeper into the trees. Still slow, still backward, still not attacking, still watching me. I didn't look at it again. I couldn't. I kept my eyes on the child in front of me and pulled him toward the light of the cabin like I was hauling him out of a current. Behind me, there was no sound of pursuit. No crashing brush, no running steps. Just the creek, steady and indifferent. And the soft whisper of leaves as the thing retreated one more pace into the dark. I herded the kids up the steps, pushed them into Juniper, and slammed the screen door hook so hard it bit into the frame. Then I blew the whistle. 3 blasts. The sound shredded the quiet and made the hairs on my arms lift. Cabin doors opened up and down the path. Flashlights snapped on. Voices called out names. The camp, that sleepy little bubble of rules and schedules and s'mores, jolted awake like an animal in a trap. The assistant director arrived with his hair sticking up and a walkie in his hand. The director came in a jacket over his pajamas, eyes wide, trying to get his brain moving fast enough. They did head counts. Cabin Juniper, 9. Cabin Maple, 12. Cabin Oak, 11. The totals rolled through radios and echoed down the paths. Someone said, "We're short 1." I said, "No, we're short 2." Because bunk 7 was still empty. Because Eli was still gone. They searched with flashlights and call whistles. They drew lines on the map. They sent 2 staff toward the creek, 3 toward the rope course, 1 to check the far cabins. They didn't let me go. They sat me on a bench by the fire pit, told me to breathe, to stay where they could see me. The embers glowed in the stone ring and threw small red light on everyone's faces, making the whole camp look like a different place. The mist thickened in the valley until the tree line disappeared completely. At dawn, when the light finally came in thin gray sheets over the mountains, they found Eli. He was sitting on the gravel path between Juniper and the bathrooms, knees hugged to his chest like he'd been there the whole night. No scratches, no mud, no twigs in his hair, just damp socks and a blank look, like he'd woken from a dream he didn't want to explain. When I knelt in front of him and said his name, he blinked at me like I was the strange part of the morning. "Eli?" I said, careful. "Where did you go?" He looked past me toward the woods. The sun was up now, and the tree line was just trees again. Green, wet, harmless. "I was following," he said. "Following who?" He frowned, trying to choose words. "The tall one," he said, like that should be enough. "The one that walks backward." My mouth went dry. "What did it say to you?" I asked. Eli's eyes shifted to my whistle, then to my face, then back to the woods. "It didn't say anything," he said, simple and sure. "It was just showing us where to go." I waited, heart hammering. "Where?" I whispered. Eli's frown deepened like he'd gotten stuck on a puzzle. He shrugged, small shoulders rising. "Past the trees," he said, "where you can't grab us anymore." The culvert thing. Suburban Raleigh floodplain. When the rain comes down hard in Raleigh, it comes down like it owns the place. The neighborhoods along Crabtree Creek sit lower than the rest of the city. Developers carved them into the floodplain decades ago, raised the houses on gentle slopes, and threaded concrete drainage tunnels beneath the streets. The system hums during storms. Water slides off shingles, runs along gutters, drops through grates, and disappears into culverts that snake beneath backyards and under playgrounds. On dry days, those culverts feel harmless. Kids lift the rusted grates and toss rocks into the shallow trickle. Teenagers spray paint the inner walls. Homeowners forget they exist. During heavy rain, the sound changes. Marcus Hale had lived in the Willow Bend subdivision for 11 years. He worked IT for the state, remote 3 days a week, and he liked routine. He liked knowing where things were. He liked that Raleigh storms followed a pattern. Thunder in the distance, wind through the loblolly pines, then the long drumming on the roof. The first time he heard the other sound, he thought it was debris. It was late September. A stalled tropical system parked over Wake County and unloaded water for hours. The street in front of Marcus's house shone like black glass. The storm drains at the corner gurgled, swallowing leaves and fast food wrappers. He stood on the covered porch, watching the runoff surge toward the curb. That was when he heard it. Metal vibrating from below, a hollow tremor that carried through the pavement. He stepped down from the porch and crossed the yard, rain soaking through his t-shirt. The nearest drain sat at the edge of his driveway. Water spiraled into it, forming a shallow whirlpool. The sound came again, deeper this time, as if something large had shifted inside the tunnel. "Probably a branch," he muttered. The vibration rolled up through the soles of his shoes. He felt it in his knees. Something moved beneath the grate. Not a flash, not a shape, a displacement. The water's surface shuddered as if something pushed through it from below, then settled again. Marcus backed away. The rain intensified, turning the street into a sheet of flowing gray. He told himself the culverts ran all the way to the creek. A fallen limb could have wedged somewhere, creating turbulence. Pressure built. The system flexed. The explanation fit neatly into place. The second time, it came with witnesses. 3 weeks later, another storm rolled through just after dusk. The neighborhood group chat buzzed with flood warnings. Marcus's neighbor, Elena Ramirez, knocked on his door around 9. "Have you heard that?" she asked, rain streaking down her glasses. He nodded. The drains. They stood under his porch light, watching the street flood. Across the road, the storm drain near the cul-de-sac churned violently. The metal grate rattled, bolts straining. A bulge rose beneath it. Elena grabbed Marcus's arm. "Did you see?" The bulge shifted, elongated, then slid sideways under the asphalt. The motion rippled down the street,
following the line of buried tunnels. One grate after another trembled in sequence, as if something moved through the network with steady purpose. It traveled fast. The vibration passed beneath their feet and continued toward the drainage easement that cut between the houses and led to the wooded strip by the creek. The rain masked everything else. Elena stepped back toward her house. That wasn't a branch. Marcus felt his pulse in his throat. It's the water pressure. The pipes expand. She held his gaze for a long second, then turned and hurried home. After that night, he began paying attention. The culverts mapped the entire subdivision. He found the original plans on the county website, blue lines branching like veins. Every street fed into the main tunnel that ran under the Greenway Trail before emptying into Crabtree Creek. The thing, if he allowed himself that word, followed the water. It appeared only during heavy rain. Light showers passed without incident. Thunderstorms that broke quickly left the drains quiet. The long, soaking systems brought it out. Marcus set up a camera by the drain at the end of his driveway. Waterproof housing, night vision enabled. He told himself he wanted to document structural strain for the HOA. The footage from the next storm showed hours of rain, headlights sliding across wet pavement, trash spinning into the grate. At 2:17 a.m., the water surged upward. The camera trembled as the grate bowed. A darker mass moved beneath the surface, thick and fluid, pressing against the metal from below. The lens caught a brief distortion, as if the rain itself bent around something rising. Then the shape flowed onward, leaving the drain to settle back into its ordinary whirl. Marcus replayed the clip until dawn. The shape lacked edges. It moved with cohesion, like a single organism, yet it adapted to the width of the tunnel. It filled the space. He checked the neighborhood forum the next morning. Several posts mentioned weird drain sounds and crazy pressure in the culverts. One person joked about sewer gators. Another blamed aging infrastructure. Elena sent him a private message. "It's learning the route." He stared at the words. That weekend, the forecast predicted another tropical system. The city issued a flood advisory. Marcus felt a weight settle in his chest. He walked the Greenway Trail that afternoon, following the path of the main culvert. The entrance sat behind a chain-link fence near the creek, a concrete mouth wide enough for a person to crouch through. Normally, a thin ribbon of water trickled out. Today, it already ran thick and brown from early rain. He stood there longer than he intended. The tunnel exhaled cool air that smelled of wet earth and rust. He imagined the thing inside, coiled somewhere in the darkness, waiting for the flow to rise. The storm hit just after midnight. Rain hammered the roof with relentless force. The power flickered once, then held. Marcus watched from his front window as water overtook the curb and spilled into lawns. The first grate began to shake. He grabbed a flashlight and stepped outside despite the downpour. Water streamed around his ankles. The drain at the end of his driveway throbbed like a living pulse. A deep surge rolled beneath the street. The bulge rose again, stronger than before. The grate lifted a fraction of an inch, bolts screaming. For a moment, Marcus thought it would tear free. The mass pressed upward. Through the torrent, he saw texture. Not scales, not fur. A shifting surface that absorbed the light and returned it warped. The rain struck it and dispersed sideways, as if hitting something dense just below the opening. It paused there, directly under him. Marcus felt an awareness, a pressure in his head, like the moment before a migraine. The vibration beneath his feet aligned with his heartbeat. The thing seemed to consider the boundary. Water continued to pour into the drain, feeding it. A car drove slowly down the street, headlights washing over Marcus. The driver honked, signaling for him to get out of the road. The moment broke. The mass slid forward, flowing down the line of culverts toward the greenway. Each drain in its path rattled in succession, tracing its movement through the neighborhood. Marcus ran along the sidewalk, following the tremors toward the easement. The rain blurred his vision. He reached the trail just as the vibration reached the main tunnel. The chain-link fence bowed inward. Behind it, within the concrete mouth of the culvert, something vast shifted. Water exploded outward in a brown surge. The beam of his flashlight caught only fragments, curved planes of moving surface, a depth that swallowed light. The thing filled the tunnel completely. For a heartbeat, it pressed toward the opening. Marcus took a step back. The creek beyond the fence roared with floodwater, swollen and violent. The current pulled at the outflow, dragging debris downstream. The mass inside the tunnel adjusted. It elongated, compressing into the flow, and slid into the creek. The fence snapped back into place. The vibration ceased. Only rain remained. In the weeks that followed, the subdivision repaired 2 damaged grates and replaced a section of fencing by the greenway. The city cited excessive hydraulic stress from the storm. Marcus kept his camera running. Heavy rain returned in November. At 1:48 a.m., the drains began to shake again. This time, the movement traveled from the creek inward, against the natural direction of the water. One grate after another trembled as the thing entered the neighborhood through the main tunnel. It navigated the network with precision. When it reached the drain at the end of Marcus's driveway, it paused. The water above it formed a smooth dome, held in place by pressure from below. Marcus watched from his window, unable to look away. The dome quivered. Then it sank back into the dark. The thing in the rafters. The barn had been sinking for years. That's what old Mr. Callahan used to say when he still drove his truck past it. The roof sagged like tired shoulders. The boards bowed inward. Tobacco once hung in thick golden rows from the rafters, curing slow in the Carolina heat. Now, the air carried dust and mold, and the faint sweetness of old leaf rot. I went there at dusk because I wanted the quiet. The barn sat off a dirt service road outside Durham, tucked behind a field that had gone wild with broom straw and sumac. Pines hemmed it in on 3 sides. The 4th opened to a low stretch of red clay and drainage ditch where frogs started up as the sun dipped. I pushed the warped door aside and stepped into the cool. Light filtered through slats in long, pale ribs. The rafters arched high overhead, black against the fading sky. Crossbeams latticed the ceiling like ribs inside a carcass. Tobacco hooks still dangled in places, rusted and swaying faintly from the draft I carried in. The barn creaked with evening temperature shifts, wood adjusting, nails easing in their holes. I liked that sound. It felt alive in a tired way. I set my flashlight on a barrel and let my eyes adjust. The threat came from above. A faint tick ran across the rafters. I looked up. Something pale slid between beams. At first, I took it for insulation torn loose, or a barn owl shifting position. Then it moved with intention. Long fingers hooked over a crossbeam. A forearm followed. Skin stretched tight over bone, gray as old ash. It moved along the ceiling. It stayed above me. My throat tightened. I stepped back, boots grinding tobacco dust. The beam overhead gave a soft, measured creak. The thing crossed hand over hand, silent except for the wood under its weight. Its limbs were too long for its body. The joints bent at angles that belonged to something built for climbing narrow spaces. Its spine showed through its skin in sharp ridges. Its head hung low between its shoulders, as if it had been pulled downward by gravity. It tracked me from the rafters. I shifted left. It shifted with me. A rusted hook swung near its face. It eased around it without breaking rhythm. The movement felt practiced, familiar, as if barns like this had always been part of its design. The barn exhaled a long groan. I backed toward the door. The last stripe of sunlight lay across the threshold like a warning line. The creature reached the center beam above me and stopped. It crouched there. Its eyes opened. They caught the last light and held it. The drop came without sound. It released the beam and fell straight down. I jumped back on instinct. It hit the dirt where I had stood, landing in a crouch. The impact sent a shock through the floorboards and up the posts. Dust burst upward in a choking cloud. It unfolded. Tall, bent, arms hanging nearly to the ground, fingers flexing. Its head tilted toward me. Its mouth opened wider than its jaw should allow. The scream stayed inside my chest. I ran. The barn shifted as I lunged for the door. My shoulder clipped a support post. The entire frame shuddered. One of the main beams overhead cracked with a sound like a rifle shot. Behind me, claws scraped wood. It climbed again. Up the wall. Across the inner frame. Above me. The threat stayed vertical. I burst into the open air just as the first section of roof gave way. Wood splintered. Rafters tore loose from their pegs. The barn collapsed inward with a rolling thunder that swallowed the frogs and the wind and every other sound in the field. I stumbled across the clay and turned. Through the rising dust, I saw it, balanced on the last standing beam, watching. The beam shifted under its weight. It did not seem to care. Its head tracked me as I backed away. The beam snapped. The rest of the structure folded in on itself, boards crashing down in a violent cascade. The roof pancaked into a heap of broken timber and drifting insulation. Dust climbed into the sky like smoke. Silence returned in slow pieces. I stood in the field, lungs burning, eyes stinging. The barn was gone. A mound of wreckage sat where it had been. I took a step toward the road. Something moved in the debris. A long arm pushed through splintered boards. Then another. It rose from the collapse as if the wood had only inconvenienced it. Dust slid off its shoulders. Nails stuck in its skin like ornaments. It plucked them out one by one, never taking its eyes off me. It climbed the outside of the remaining wall frame that still leaned upright. Above me again. It understood elevation. It crouched on the highest surviving post, silhouetted against the darkening sky. The pines behind it swayed in a soft evening wind. I felt smaller in the open field than I had inside the barn. It dropped once more. This time, it aimed for the ditch. It vanished into the tall grass without a sound. The frogs fell silent. The field stretched empty before me. The pines loomed. Above, branches shifted. I walked backward toward the road, eyes lifted to the tree line. Something pale moved from limb to limb, keeping pace. Above, not around. When I reached my truck, I climbed inside and locked the doors. My hands shook against the steering wheel. I started the engine and pulled onto the dirt road without looking back. In the rearview mirror, a thin shape crossed the road behind me. It moved along the tops of the fence posts, balanced, following. I kept driving. The sky turned fully dark. Every overpass on the highway felt lower than it should. Every tree branch above the road looked capable of holding weight. I understand barns now. They provide beams. They offer rafters. They invite something that hunts from the ceiling. And in North Carolina, there are thousands of them.